Bagaetsho dumela. Firstly, okay, let me introduce myself. My name is Vose Gumbi. I'll be directing the program for today. Firstly, let me start by apologizing for the late start. Some of the things are out of our control. I'm sure when you came in, you saw that there was a road closure. So people had to be redirected. Apologies for that. I think it should have been communicated from our side. So that was an error. Apologies. But nonetheless, we are here and we are going to start. I'd like to start by acknowledging a few dignitaries who are here with us today. I'd like to acknowledge the MEC for Economic Development in the Gauteng province, Ms. Tasnim Mutara. I'd like to acknowledge Ms. Nomfane Lokota, the former Youth League Deputy Secretary General. Mr. Lisoho Makubela, who's the spokesperson for the ANC in the Gauteng province. Ms. Lumka Oliphant, who's the Chief Director at the Department of Social Development. So yeah, and everyone who are here today, thank you so much for taking your time to come and attend this event, ahead of your busy schedule. So we sincerely appreciate it. Before we start, or before we get to the formalities, we are going to have a poem rendered by Motuadini, who's going to come here. Can you please give a round of applause?
Good day, everybody. My name is Mutuadini Maboho, and I am here to recite a poem titled An African Soul Pours Out His Soul. It goes, you call me a kwere just because I come from Zimbabwe. You mock me and taunt my blackness, forgetting the same coat of blackness also covers your body. You treat me like a mule, a beast of burden to ease your life. I till your fields and you pay me peanuts, taking advantage of my wretched misery. You call me kaboom kalakabem when you see me carrying bundles of blankets. Just because I come from Somalia or Ghana, you put labels on my haggard face. And you forget who sent supported you. In your war of liberation, you bite the very hand that fed you. In your struggle for freedom, Chimurenga, my South African brother, how easily you forget. Remember who trained your liberation army and armed Umkhonto weSizwe with AK-47s. Remember how we fought side by side like brothers in arms. Ask the dead spirits of Oliver Tambo, Samora Machel, Toivo Chatoivo, Tsietsi Mashinini, Chris Hani, and the father of the nation, Nelson Mandela. They will tell you of the long, long nights in Quito Carnival, where our guerrilla combatants pressed against Goliath, the apartheid regime. Then you were David and I was Jonathan, blood brothers with bonds lasting a lifetime. But now my South African brother.
Alone, he's with Dr. Kwezi Mabasa, who's going to be a discussant on this very important book. Dr. Kwezi is an economic and social policy lead at the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung, and a part-time sociology lecturer. He's an interdisciplinary. He has an interdisciplinary and obtained his MA in political sciences from the University of Pretoria. Completed his PhD in development sociology from the University of the Witwatersrand. He's a former Mistra senior researcher in the Faculty of Political Economy. Before his Mistra employment, he served as the National Policy Coordinator at the Congress of the South African Trade Unions, Program Manager at the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung, and Junior Lecturer at the Department of Political Sciences at the University of Pretoria. He is a fellow at the Atlantic Fellows for Racial Equity Program, hosted by the Nelson Mandela Foundation and Columbia University in New York. Dr. Kwezi has published several book chapters and articles in both peer-reviewed and popular publications. His work mainly focuses on the heterodox political economy, labor studies, and racial capitalism. He is the co-editor of Mistra's 2020 book titled Beyond Tenderpreneurship, Rethinking Black Business and Economic Empowerment. He is also the co-editor of Mistra's 2021 publication entitled Land in South Africa, Contested Meanings and Nation Formation. So I'm going to hand over to our author, who's going to give us the context of the book, and then from there we're going to have a discussion. At some point you will be allowed during this sitting to engage both with the author and the discussant and really try to dispel some of those notions that are there largely on Facebook about why this book has been written. Thank you so much.
I'm not going to stand up. Thank you very much. Thank you so very much, and thank you everyone for being able to make it here. A lot of people were asking me why I chose to have this book launch in the afternoon. The norm is that book launches are normally held in the evenings, around 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock, and that's usually to allow people who would be coming back from work to be able to make it. And we had to, I have had to consult. I consult a lot. I know that when you see me on Facebook, you think that I am a person who does things her own way. But I've got a group of people that I'm always consulting about certain decisions, including even decisions about the time that this launch would take place. And so, we live in a country with a particular context and some difficulties. And one of those difficulties that we have to deal with is the difficulty of gender-based violence in our country. And it's a scourge that really affects all of us, and it confronts us every day. And so when you make decisions as an author, being a woman, you also make decisions thinking about other women. To compel people to have to drive in Pretoria or in Johannesburg late at night is not correct. And so I'm very thankful, because I know most of you, for you to be here, you've had to take leave from work, you've had to leave the office early. I'm very grateful that you made that sacrifice, and that you understand that the bigger picture was about the safety and the protection of women in particular, because they would have been the ones most affected. When I announced the launch of this book, there's, as Vusi correctly says, there were a lot of discussions, a lot of debate about the timing of the book, about the intention of the book. And I think it's important that perhaps as a starting point, I should take you through the logic, why this had to be written, why it was written, why it was written when it was written, and why we are having this conversation today. Now, I'm pretty sure all of you drive around the province, and those who are watching online virtually have seen the kind of election campaigning material that is all over our street polls, on social media, on TV, and everywhere, right? And one of the very salient messages that is coming out, particularly from opposition parties in our country, is this idea of saving South Africa. Rescue South Africa, save South Africa, right? South Africa is this infant child that must be saved by everybody, right? Everybody is here to save South Africa. And of course, that language is a campaign language, but it's a language that is embedded in something, right? But when you embed language in something, you also intentionally exclude something else, right? Because language is very powerful. Language shapes, language creates, but language also produces, reproduces, but it also removes certain things in the process. And one of the things that gets removed in a language of saving South Africa, in a language of rescuing South Africa, right, is an exclusion of why South Africa is where it is, right? But beyond why South Africa is where it is, a language of saving and rescuing also presupposes that those who support certain things, in this case, the ANC as an organization, are people that they themselves must be rescued from their thinking. They are people that must be rescued from their beliefs, right? And they are people that must be rescued from the ideologies that they support, right? And that is a very interesting language. For me as a scholar, and as someone who's deeply invested in the ideational space, it's a language and a grammar that I've thought about over a long period of time. But I've thought about it on both ends, right? I've thought about it as someone who is curious to deconstruct the deeper meaning of the language, the ideological intentions of the language, but to also perhaps question and challenge my own thinking, right? Because in many ways, in one way or another, we've all flirted with that kind of an idea, right? We've flirted with that kind of a language, right? And perhaps in frustration, more times than not, we have flirted with the question that this book is fundamentally trying to respond to, which is, why do people vote for the ANC, right? South Africans, we sit, we gather in spaces everywhere, social media and all of that, and all of us have got things to talk about. I just spoke about now, when I started this conversation, about gender-based violence in our country, this scourge that happens because of the heteropatriarchal normative society that we are in, but because of failures, right, that we've also seen in policy implementation, failures in prioritization, failures in so much, right? But they extend beyond gender-based violence. They speak to spatialities, right? The fact that when you drove in here, you would have seen what the place looks like on the outside, right? It is a spatial question. But a spatial question is also deeply an ideological question. It's an economic question, it's a social question, it's a question of culture, it's a question of so much, right? And a lot of that, we have argued, has been a construct and a creation of our very amoral past, but also of contemporary decisions, right, of the last 30 years. And failures, there have been successes, there have been failures. And where the successes have been there, they've been brilliant. And where there have been failures, they've been devastating. And so a lot of people in that kind of a context tend to lend themselves and to sit comfortably in this box of narratives, and in particular, a narrative of a single story. And the single story in which so many of us sit, right, and so many South Africans, in fact, sit, is the story of the ANC that has failed, the ANC that does nothing. You know, the absolutism in South Africa, we are a country of absolutes, you know. People can't be nuanced and they can't be complex. They are either great or they are bad. So the ANC is either a perfect party or it's a disastrous party. The DA is a perfect party or it's a disastrous party. This particular ideology is perfect or it's disastrous, right? We are not a country that is very comfortable sitting with nuance and sitting with the discomfort of layeredness. And I thought that it's important that if we are truly invested in the ideational space, we need to engage with that discomfort, right? To engage with those layers of narratives, to engage with the difficulties of the questions that we have started to become comfortable making assumptions about and drawing conclusions. And perhaps importantly, to sit with the discomfort of speaking to people whose ideas we may not share, but who we think matter. But I think it matters, right? I really do think it matters that even if we don't agree with people, even if we don't see the world the way they see it, that their ideas and their beliefs are not illegitimate because they don't reflect ours. And I think I wanted, when I started this project, and it's something that I've been thinking about for many years, but it's only last year that I really sat down and thought, let me put this to paper. Let me do the difficult work, right, that so many of us have for so long failed to do. And that difficult work is the work of ceasing to sit behind our laptops and analyze the ANC voter and analyze the sentiment about the ANC, and to actually speak to ANC voters, to ask them these questions, these uncomfortable questions that we have, right? Why do you vote for the ANC? Why is it that you would be a young person who is on the receiving end, right, of the structural challenges that confront this country, of the unemployment and all of these things, and yet you still look at the ANC, which has been a governing party for 30 years, which has recorded some successes and some failures, and you still look at this organization and you see it as a party that's worthy of your vote, right? Why is it something that you want to do? And that conversation is what led to this. So over the year of 2023 to just about January of this year, I sat with a number of young people, just about over 100 young people in the country. And Gauteng was my area of focus, and you will see on chapter 2 of this book why Gauteng in particular. It's a diverse province, it's a contested province, it's a province of, you know, exceptional history, exceptional dynamism and all of that, right? There's so much. Gauteng really is the epicenter of the very different and layered complexities that define South Africa as a country, as a people, and so on. And I sat with a number of young people, over 100 young people, to ask them that question, right? And I was very deliberate in who I chose to speak to. Because when you want to understand why people vote for the ANC, you don't only go to members of the ANC, right? Who constitutionally, in terms of the ANC, are required to support the organization. Those who don't belong to the ANC, who are not members of the ANC, you speak to those who are not compelled by anything other than their own beliefs and their own conscience to give their vote to the governing party. And these were the young people that I particularly wanted to speak on. On social media, I approached several universities to put out a call for me, young people, and it was quite a very extensive conversation, online, offline, from social, WhatsApp and so on. We made an agreement that we're going to identify who these young people are, because part of that also they felt, and I think I'm compelled to believe, I'm moved by their argument, is that it humanizes them. Because the ANC supporter is often invisible, right? The ANC supporter is those millions of people that we don't know. It's who are these people? Kibo mang batho ba, ditlaela tse le tse votelang ANC. But we don't know kibo mang ditlaela tseo, right? We know gore ke ditlaela and aba nagane. That's what they say, right? Ditlaela tse votelang ANC. But when you do that and you say batho ke ditlaela, you also don't humanize them, right? You make them anonymous. And so by putting a name and stories to these people, we remove that anonymity to say ANC voters are not ditlaela tse ko khoneng. These are people who are rational in their thinking, and these are human beings, and they want their stories to be known. I'm going to pick just 3 of these responses or these stories from these young people about why they vote for the ANC, right? So I will start with this. Okay, so I'm going to just read this excerpt, right? Conversations with young ANC voters. The following are responses to the questions posed. They are transcribed from voice recordings and copied and pasted from written responses. The responses are the only language edited. The wording and content is that of the participants, including those who took the interview in an indigenous language. While over 100 interviews were conducted and are all used in analysis in the next chapter, just a quarter of the responses are shared in the following section. These chosen responses provide rich data and provide a strong foundation on which analysis will be made in chapter 4. And I quote now. I was born in Tembisa and I was raised in an informal settlement in Pomona, where I live with my mother and my little sister for about 12 years. I went to Mihlareng Primary School in Bredel and then completed my secondary schooling at Petit High School in Benoni. After high school, I went to Ekurhuleni West College, where I studied travel and tourism for 3 years. Life in an informal settlement was not good at all, especially since I was raised by a single mother who was unemployed. The living conditions were not good at all, as the place was overcrowded. As a first-time voter, I will be voting for the ANC because I believe that the ANC has made me. I have managed to complete all my studies with the help of the National Student Financial Aid Scheme. I don't believe that my mother would have been able to afford my studies since she was a single unemployed woman. Since primary, I have been a beneficiary of ANC policies. In primary, I used a free government bus that took me to and from school. Every year, we got free school uniform, and there was a feeding scheme at our school for children who couldn't afford to carry lunch. Earlier last year, my mother received a stand in Davidton. It has water and lights. Now, I can proudly say that I have a place to call home because of the ANC. And that's Mnisi, who's 27 years old in Ekurhuleni. A second excerpt reads, I was born and raised in Mufolo, where I still reside. I recently enrolled for my undergraduate degree at the University of the Witwatersrand, where my studies are being paid for by NSFAS. The reason that I consider voting for the ANC is because the work that they have done in my community is commendable. When the community cries out for certain problems to be resolved, the issues get attended to within days. These include electricity and water issues. There is also a distribution of food parcels and care for the needy in our community. Another reason is that I have seen the impact that the ANC has in my university, where SASCO fights for students who get academically excluded so that they can come back and study. I have also seen them go an extra mile fighting for students' rights in our university. That's Anne Mageza, who's 19 years old and from Johannesburg. Another excerpt is also from Ekurhuleni. This one says, I was born in a small village around Giyani in the Limpopo province. I came in Gauteng around 2009 to further my studies. I studied human resource management at Central Johannesburg College, and I obtained my N6 certificate. I am now staying at Tembisa, and I'm unemployed. I do not come from a poor background. I'm a hardworking and dedicated woman. I will vote for the ANC because it is the only party that brings hope for us as South African youth. It is the only party that usually fulfills what they promise in our community. I'm staying in an informal settlement in Winnie Mandela, Zone 5 in Tembisa. We have access to many things because of the ANC and its leadership. We have access to water and sanitation, health facilities, education, roads and transport, to name but a few. Despite the fact that our community is an informal settlement, access to all these services is within walking distance. Them renewing and rebuilding the party brings hope that in next year's renewing and building the party brings hope that in next year's election, the ANC will bring the good services to Gauteng without corruption, but dedication and commitment. The ANC is a party that brings unity, not dividing us. And the last one is from, it's not the last one, it's the last one I'm going to read. Just a sec, sorry. Oh yes, so this one is from Ekurhuleni as well. Says, I'm a single mother of 2 beautiful kids. I was born and raised in Polokwane in the Limpopo province, but I'm currently staying in Gauteng. I'm currently unemployed, but studying towards a degree in public administration and management at the University of South Africa. In 2014, I will be doing my final year. As a NSFAS beneficiary who is staying in my parents' RDP house and also receiving a child support grant, I will keep voting for the ANC because I will never trust any party with my vote. I mean, my kids are going to school for free and they're receiving free meals at school. I'm a university student who also received education without paying. With these reasons, I will consider voting for the ANC, and there are more. Before I hand over to Dr. Mabasa, I'd like to please acknowledge Ambassador Losi, who just came in now to join us. She's the Chief State of Protocol in our country, and I'm very grateful that you could be here, Mama. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Malaika. Afternoon, comrades, colleagues, and friends. I've already been introduced. So the main argument of this book is basically based on one central message. It seeks to reassert and legitimize the political agency of Black ANC voters by challenging the idea that these voters are uneducated, politically irrational, biased, and unconscious. And it pursues this objective by drawing on the experiences of young people in Gauteng and trying to explore and examine the underlying reasons why they support the ANC. And the idea that this book challenges is important because it's based on a very, I think, paternalistic and racist worldview of Black political action, voter behavior, and choice. And so where I wanted us to start was, I wanted you to explain, Malaika, what do you think informs this paternalistic view of the uneducated, politically unconscious, and ill-informed voter? Is it the approaches, the literature of voter behavior studies in both the academy but also in policy research, or are there other underlying political and sociological factors that are related to our context in South Africa that inform this notion of the uneducated and unconscious and ill-informed voter, which is based on political, what I think is political paternalism, right? Yeah.
Thank you very much, Quiz. So I think it's a myriad of issues, Quiz, right? But at the heart of which is really about the dominant mode of production in South Africa and in the world, right? Because the conversations about, or the narrative about the ANC voter as irrational, as unthinking, right? And when we speak about the ANC voter, when you look at it statistically, demographically, it's largely a Black voter, right? The narrative of the Black person, right, and the Black voter as unthinking, as devoid of age. And when you look at the literature quiz that you then speak about, literature is not devoid of that dominant mode of production. It emerges from somewhere. Schools, what we are learning in schools, the knowledges that inform what we learn in school, the epistemological foundation of the universities that we are in, as it were, itself is rooted in that mode of production, right? It's rooted in that logic, right, of Blackness as unthinking, of Blackness as irrational. It's not something that I think is and I think this is part of why this narrative must be challenged, or this conversation must be started, because like I'm saying, it's not about South African Blacks. It's about Black people in general, in the world. The place of Blackness in the world has historically been a place of inferiority, a place of children, right? And part of what the white man's burden has always, seeing Black people as a white man's burden, part of what is rooted in that is about ideas, right? The idea that Black people can think, or the Black people can't think rather, is rooted in that idea, right? We must look after them, we must colonize and civilize them because they can't do it by themselves and they can't think by themselves. And so when you see these things happening in post-1994 South Africa and all of that, it is precisely because, and it's one of the things that this book also wants to raise, right? we have not had, that apartheid was abolished and outlawed, has not necessarily brought a break about to coloniality, right? The abolishing of apartheid has not brought about an end to coloniality, to the structures in place, to the systems in place, but also to the thinking that informs that kind of world from whence we emerge. And it's a thinking that affects everyone. It's not unique to South Africa. It happens everywhere else in the world. And part of the people that actually, when you read the book, you'll see I've had conversations with, were also young people from Zimbabwe, right? Who have got their own particularities in their own issues, but there are also some universalities that are also, we see as well, that we can trace in their own struggle. And so, Kwesi, I think that all of this can be rooted in that mode of production that is not simply about the economy, that is not simply about spatiality, but that is also fundamentally, and more than anything, about the knowledges and the epistemologies that inform the lives of black people in South Africa, but the lives of black people all over the world. I think throughout the world there is a thinking of blackness as infantile. It's not unique. It's not unique to us.
Yeah, and since we live in a world that is characterized by racialized capitalism, when we have debates about ideas of what is civilized and what is human, we also can't divorce those ideas from the political economy.
Yes.
So I think it's also rooted in classist assumptions.
Yes.
That working class individuals or communities can't exercise proper agency because of their positionality, their position in society. The second question that I want to ask related to the main argument that you present in the book, you focus, of course, on youth. And there's been a lot of debates in youth literature, particularly literature that looks at youth political participation over several years, around how do we characterize the youth when we engage in this discussion. Often the youth is presented as a homogeneous group.
Yes.
Without any class, race, gender, or geographic disparities or differentiation. And I think this is something very important because when the youth is presented as this homogeneous group, we don't get the nuanced answers that you seek to explore in the book. So how did you deal with this question around the intersectional nature of youth identity in South Africa beyond the dominant demographic that you normally get in the book, and how did you approach that?
So the question in South Africa is interesting for many, many reasons. I remember a couple of years ago, I had a conversation with a friend of mine about what it means, what it means to be youth in South Africa. And this was the basis of the conversation, right? So youth, when it's defined solely on the arbitrary confines of age, right? It almost always excludes black people, and especially when we then start to say, young people by this age should have, at 30 young people have gone to school, at 30 you are working, at 30 you are, and all of that, right? That big conversation about young people at this age, this is what should have happened. Because what then happens is that the youth of young people, of young black people in particular, and working class black people at home, or people are struggling, and we need to, take longer to enter the labor market, right? And when they do enter the labor market, because of its historical segmentation that continues even to this day, we've got a very segmented labor market in South Africa. Gender pay gap, racial pay gap are real things. There's studies about that, they've been done. What that then means is that the same young black people, right, who are forced to become adults, are also then forced to remain young because they don't have the resources, for example, that are required to then do the work that we all normally prescribe to adults, right? That at 30 you must have a house and all of that stuff that we tend to say. And so it's very normal to find a black person only at the age of 40, at the age of 45, having their house for the very first time, right? Their youth having been lost to doing the work of looking after family, historical, responsibilities, and so on and so forth, right? And I think when you speak about, when you say youth is not homogeneous, it's actually a very, and this might sound like a very simple analogy, but it's not simplistic, because it's about the complexities of what it means when we simply define youth and leave it only at age, and not consider the different contexts, but also the historical positioning of black people in South Africa and what that has meant for their place in the world, for their place in the labor market, but also for their place generally in the community, as it were, right? But beyond that, the issue also about young people having to grow up very quickly. the devastation, for example, of the HIV/AIDS pandemic that it has had, particularly in the black community, and there are many reasons why it has particularly affected the black communities, special issues about our geo-histories and so on and so forth, right? But what you get out of that is that you also then have, and this is the work of Usis Lumka, she's actually doing a master's degree on some of this work, about child-headed households, right? Where you've got young people who are heading households because of the devastation and the burden of disease that confronts particularly black, poor working class people, right? And so those young people themselves become batho ba bagolo as a result. So the idea motho o mogolo le ngwana, especially in the context of young, poor working class black people, is it's a long conversation. It's a very difficult and a complex thing to make sense of. And that is why the issue of age alone, we confine ourselves to it because the IEC says youth is this age and all of that. And government says youth is this age, we are going to do youth policies, support that we are providing to youth ends here and so on. But there are also those nuances that beg for engagement, right? About what young black working class people have had to lose, that in effect actually also means a loss of their youth, in very many ways, in very many complex ways, but a loss of also so much more. And when I had to then decide to navigate this thing of not agreeing with this very idea of what youth means, right? And particularly in the context of young working class black people with our complex geo-histories, right? But on the other hand, having to confine myself to this idea of what government defines as youth, because some of the discussions about youth and policy and all of that also then find expression in this. And I think it's probably, for me, an entire book in itself, really. The question of youth and what it means is a entire conversation in itself in the context of South Africa. And as far as possible, you'll see, for example, when you read here, you'll find young people who are working, young people who are employed, some are senior executives, some are in the private sector, some are this and that and so on. So I tried as far as possible, even when I then had to choose that group, to find a diversity of people, right? Young people who are students, those who are working, those who are not, those who have studied and those who have not, those in different areas. You've got young people in informal settlements, you've got young people who are saying, hey, look, we have our own houses and all of that and so on. So it's a different group in terms of class of young people. But I think the whole debate and a discussion about what it means for the poor working class, in particular, this issue of age, is one that I think begs for further exploration.
And I think what it also does is it moves us from this idea that when we discuss youth participation or citizenship, we either look at voter participation and registration, or we either look at the question around youth employment. So it pushes us to understand youth agency citizenship at a deeper level, beyond these instrumentalist ideas of just, are they showing up to vote, and are they employed, or are they a problem? And I think that's something that comes out in some sections of the book. I now want to shift us to some of the key themes. So one of the key themes, which is related to the argument or the message that you outline in the book, is the idea that these young people are informed, they are politically conscious, and they are exercising agency. But at the same time, these young people are not card-carrying members of the ANC. So I found that interesting, because then the question that came to my head was, what is the root of that political consciousness? And the reason why that question came to my head is because we know that young people might not necessarily be members of political parties, but they're engaged in different forms of political activism. Young people are involved in social justice movements. They are part of professional bodies. Young people are engaged in cultural activism. And these are often viewed as non-political forms of human action and agency and collective organizing, but actually they are highly political. So I'm interested to hear your ideas about what is the root of the consciousness of the interviewees or the participants in the book who aren't card-carrying members? Because surely that consciousness does not stem from just their individual lived experience. And what's your thinking about that? Yeah.
So one of the things that I'm finding very interesting about South African, the discourse on the so-called youth voter apathy, right? That whole discussion about youth voter apathy. I've written in the Eyewitness News about my my reservations about that labeling, that tag, right, is that and it goes back to what I had raised earlier on about South Africa and our very absolutist politics, right? The absolutist politics of one thing must either be, it's either or. There's no nuance, there's no layers, there's nothing. Either or and nothing else. And what that either or type of thinking and approach has done, right, is that South Africa, it has made South Africa and South Africans for a very long time were very state-centric. For a very long time, we were very state-centric people, right? Ideas about what change looks like, ideas about what things had to look like were about, government and all of that. Government and all of that, right? And so participation in that context, when you were deemed, when you were deemed to be participating, to be doing something, it's when you are, for example, a member of a political party. Then in that way, right, you are a member of the ANC or the DA, of the EFF and all of that, right? And these are parties that are represented in government, right? And so if you are a member of these organizations, you inform what might happen in government and all of that, right? So it was a lot of things that needed to change in South Africa and all of that. It was about government change, government must drive this change, government must and all of that. And I think over time, and I don't know, Kwezi, when this, and I mean, I can't even say over time because it's not a recent thing. We do come from a past where, but because of the complexities of what was the state then, the complexities of that might have been a bit different. But I think I'm seeing, and at least what I saw with this, right, is that there's a different thinking by young people about thinking South Africa, thinking through South Africa and doing the dream work of what South Africa must look like outside this state-centric approach. Because as you correctly say, Kwezi, a lot of young people are actually very politically engaged. They're politically engaged even in institutions and instruments that you would not have thought were political in any manner, in any nature, right? The church, for example. Quite a number of young people are involved in the church, even in institutions of higher learning, right? The church is an important instrument there. They've got, I know when I was at Rhodes University, you had the SCO, you had other church organizations, church-related organizations there, where young people organized there were conversing on real life issues. It was not just a gathering of let's discuss the Bible and so on in the ends there, right? It was a gathering of, as the church, how do we respond to this expulsion of students in the Fees Must Fall movement, right? As students who are in the ZimSoc, the Zim Society, which was, it's supposedly just about fun and all of that, but students in societies like that are having conversations about what is it that we can do as students of Zimbabwe who are in the diaspora to aid in popularizing or being part of protest action in Zimbabwe from the spaces that we occupy and so on. And this is a society, and we've got a lot of those in higher learning institutions. This is a society that is, social, cultural, and so on. But conversations like that do take place, right, in those kinds of institutions. But other instruments as well, which I didn't know about actually until a few years ago. I was introduced to it by a friend of mine, Temiso Kanyile, sorry. And he was part of a branch of Kaizer Chiefs. I didn't even know that sports club has got branch. Like you actually can be a card carrying, and Kaizer Chiefs in particular has a branch. Okay, so so there are this the club, like the soccer club, right? Bo Pirates, bo Mamelodi Sundowns, bo Kaizer Chiefs. Binalidi branch, like actual branches where people meet and discuss issues, and they'll also sit and reminisce and all of that, but they also discuss issues that are of importance. And those gatherings, even if they're not discussing Karl Marx and Robert Sobukwe and so on, right, are engaging in day-to-day issues of societies and communities that they are part of. Stay was in one Yako Soweto. It was big. I didn't even know. Like, it was big and all of that, right? And he took me to one of these events that they horrible. Like, serious, but what do you like? But I got the card. No, I need the card. I need the card. I want a card. Like how train. But I go to Kaizer Chiefs. Like, yeah, and it happens. Things like that happen, right? And you find young people gathering in these kinds of spaces, right? And people in general, not just young people, gathering in these spaces. But perhaps interestingly, the most interesting one for me, Quiz, there's a book club called Mufftown Book Club. Mufftown Book Club is led by a group of people. One of them is a guy called Sello Tatai. Now, Mufftown Book Club hosts monthly book discussions, right? And they do that in taverns. Yeah, I was invited to go and speak at an event, and I thought I'm going to be speaking in a place like this, and they gave me the address and go Mufftown, Mahike. and it dropped me kospotong. And I'm like, it cannot be. It can't be. Why a real kospotong, you know? And I called Selo, like, Selo, ke mo Spotong. I think this Google navigator is not seeing this township proper. And he says, no, we are here. This is actually where we gather, right? We are gathering in these townships, and we are gathering Kodi Potong. And this is where we sit, and they discuss all kinds of books. That day, I think we were talking about Ama Ata Aidu, or was it Aikwe Ama? One of those books we were talking about. But it was in a thesis, right? And that's why we probably don't look at that Potong. Yeah, and all of that. Yeah, and we must be sober, right? We must be sober to be doing that. So you can't be sipping you can't be having your savannah and talking about, you know, in this community there are teenage young people who are falling pregnant. How are we dealing with that? This is not young people having sex with adults. This is rape and all of that. You can't imagine that Kospotong, people can be sitting having that conversation and all of that, right? And so what that does, Mama Nomfanelo, is that it presents a very false idea that political consciousness can only be born solely within particular confines and particular context, right? Whereas, as you correctly say, Kwezi, in professional organizations, very professional and very unprofessional setups. I did speak about the Kaizer Chiefs Club. Unprofessional setups like that. Gadlala. Don't walk out. I have no beef with Kaizer Chiefs. I don't. But you get those kinds of setup as well, where young people are engaged in quiz, right? And I think what that for me signals, right? It signals a very important moving away from the idea, or rather, in fact, not even just moving away from the idea of the government as the sole answer and everything, to the anchor to everything. But it also speaks about the idea of really what we define, right, as a starting point of consciousness, really, right? Because for us, Thabo, yourself, that's the Thabo that I'm speaking about in my book. That Thabo, his first page, when you open first page, it's talking about him then. So Thabo, you and I would think about it as, you know, in the very, like, we are academics, so we want it in the academic space, requirements and stuff like that, right? And I think when you are socialized into that kind of thinking, that there's only one particular type of knowledge, there's only one particular kind of idea in society, it's very difficult to imagine then a society that looks different to the one that you are used to. It was different for me, being Malaika who wants to be in the confines, roads, to see myself being ko tavening ko Maftown, with those people, right? And I think there's something important there, Kwezi, right? There's something important about the spaces that are occupied by people and the important organizing that happens and conversations that happen in those spaces, and how those spaces mobilize and shape society, as it were, right? That might seem like there are different struggles in different contexts, actually emerge from a single root, right? I think the failure to say, but these things are this is the chromatin network of this neoliberalism we talk about. This is the chromatin network of capitalism as a system. This is what it looks like, right? I think the failure has been in the ability to articulate that as being a chromatin network from a single nucleus. But I do think that the mere existence of all these chromatin networks that emerge in different communities, in different kinds of organizations and so on, formal and informal, is telling about where this social consciousness come from, but also about the shift away from the thinking and the realization that if we are to create and to fashion this higher civilization that we speak about, it is not going to be the government alone that does it, right? That all of us have got a responsibility, all of us. It is not the government alone that's going to do it. I've had, people, Ole and I, Ole Maboy, she's my friend there, she's sitting there. Complain and we call each other like, I'm driving and this guy just threw out a paper thing and we will swear him to some TV and all of that. But one of the things we often talk about when we talk about that is to say, this idea, there's people, strata se fail and stuff like that. That's not the role of government, really. Government, we can talk about, the fact that there's urbanization and it brings these challenges, the resources, even sanitation and all of that and so on. But certain things in our communities where we come from it's not about what the government can do, right? And I think there's a thinking that's starting to emerge, that's starting to realize that. And that is why we see also such a huge emergence of community-based organizations that are doing work, and we might sometimes get frustrated, oh, but it's a duplicate. Everyone is doing everything together, it's in silos, and you are all doing the same thing. But the mere fact that people recognize that there is this work that still needs to be done, and it's not government alone that must do it, for me, Kwezi, it's very encouraging about how South society and South Africans generally are starting to reimagine a society in which government is also one of the stakeholders of this country that we love so much, and not just the main one.
Push you a bit on this one. Consciousness can be conservative or it can be progressive. Okay? So the fact that it exists outside of political parties doesn't mean that it's always progressive. So I want to understand, how do we link this non-party consciousness building with support for the ANC? Is it because the ANC has legitimacy in institutions outside of the party? But how do we link the two? Because that is the gist of the book. Yeah.
So I think, Kwezi, one of the ways, right? So the other thing, and I think Dr. Pedro Mzileni did the foreword for this book. Dr. Pedro Mzileni speaks about it, articulates it quite very eloquently, right? When he traces the history of the ANC, right? But also the place of South African people in the ANC, and why so many people still identify with the ANC, right? He writes a very eloquent foreword, quite very eloquent. And I think the reality of the situation is that even as Kwezi, and it's one of the, obviously the critique that we might have at some point, or even in this discussion about the ANC, it's distancing of itself away from spaces that it historically has always occupied. And those spaces include those institutions that we speak about, those instruments. In fact, I think the language of the Congress movement speaks about it as organs of mass power, right? I think that's the language, the organs of mass power. It's speaking about those things. I'm speaking about the Kaizer Chiefs clubs and all of that and so on, the choir and all of that and so on, right? Those youth spaces and so on and so forth, those organs of mass power. The ANC historically was very deeply rooted in those things, right? And particularly in townships, right? In townships, and here, I mean, you'll be hard pressed to meet anyone from my late mother's generation who was not a part of any of these. They will tell you that no, Ronane really and we had this organization, but it was part of the mass democratic movement and all of that and so on. So historically, the ANC has always been very deeply embedded in communities, right? And I think part of that history, and I think it's a very deeply unfortunate thing that we see the ANC move away from that, right? We see the ANC now, when ANC leaders go into the community, and they were not members of that church, and all of that, right? Because historically that was not the case, right? There were people who were in that church, and so when you are doing mobilization work, for example, for the ANC, you're not going there as a visitor. You are a person who belongs in that church, and they knew you. That, Mamu Winnie Madikizela Mandela was she was not a celebrity in our church. She was a member of the church who came to church every time, right? And so when a person like that goes and does mobilization work in that church, it's not a stranger, an ANC leader far away from us. It's an ANC member who's always been in this church, who's just coming to speak to us. And the same thing when the ANC is embedded in every other institution, and in the arts, in the creative arts and so on, it does not become an event. Then when ANC members are embedded in that, it's not an event when they are there. And I think there is still, to some level, parts of that emerge. Like part of that are still there. We can still see traces of that, of ANC, comrades, ANC, genuine members of the ANC, who are still very deeply embedded in their communities, right? Who are there when Haile Mafu Abatu, Bakwali, Bachopadi, Bakata, and all of that and so on. Because that's what the ANC has, for so many black people, historically looked like. That is the ANC they know, right? And that ANC that they know, I think, is not completely gone. It's not gone completely, right? We see it moving away, but it's not completely gone. And I think the fact that it's still there, remnants of it are still there, Kwezi, is part of why young people who might know little, I mean, you'll see also some of the discussions that people are having here, right? People who will say, no, na ANC, and all of that, and that's important to me because and it's something that my grandmother would say to you as well. My grandmother, if you were to say to her ANC, she'll tell you many other reasons, but she'll also say to you ANC impolokets motho ngwanaka bana baka, right? Because ha ne bana baka ba tlhokofala e ne le ma ANC ba tla mo ba tlo phega ba tlo etsang ba tlo thusa mo ntlong and all of that e ne le batho ba rulang le bona mo locationing and all of that, right? And I think Kwezi, that thing matters. The embeddedness of ANC in these what they were then calling organs of mass power is something that is not completely gone. And I think young people, and quite at least even those that I spoke to are able to see this and to identify with it, I think.
Okay, I want us to shift to another important theme in the book, around policy and the youth, and critical perspectives on policy. So in the book, you emphasize the idea or the reality that young people vote for the ANC because they've gained from all the socio-economic policies of the ANC, and their families have gained from them. Social security, housing, education policy. Yet, there's also a tradition of young people criticizing the macroeconomic policies of the ANC since the 1990s. Because although you had, and you correctly mentioned the RDP in the book, it coexisted with a neoliberal political economy framework that undermined some of those particular gains. And this tradition of young people criticizing this policy, it's from the 1990s, and we saw it even come up during the Fees Must Fall protests. So I'm interested in this paradox, right? The young people who acknowledge the role of social policy, but at the same time are part of a youth tradition over the past years who've criticized the macroeconomic framework and the policy decisions of the ANC. I think it's an interesting thing to think about. Yeah.
I think, and you know, because it was one of the most interesting things to me, because a lot of people, right, assume those that was talking about. A lot of people assume that this is a book about voters of the ANC who are uncritical, right? And the assumption is also that those who vote for and support the ANC blindly, they do it blindly, right? They don't have any criticism of the ANC. They don't have their issues with the ANC, right? And that it's blind. So the thinking is that it's a blind support. It actually isn't. And a lot of young people who I spoke to, right, raise the same issues, right? That, you know, we support the ANC for A, B, C, D, right? But I'm unemployed, right? And I understand that part of the issues that I might be dealing with my unemployment has to do with some of the macroeconomic decisions that the ANC government has taken over the years, right? You hear young people who say, I moved from Limpopo, or I moved from the Eastern Cape to move to Gauteng, right? And part of the reason why I moved from the Eastern Cape is because our small town where I was coming from, you know, some small town, and it fell apart and all of that and so on. And even when they don't clearly say, Kwezi, that it's failures of macroeconomic policy, you do get the sense, right? That you when you think about that thing to say, but oh, okay, but there are also some of the problems that we had, right? When we were really reimagining and rebuilding this new South Africa, right? That we did not think very critically about what the development of small towns looks like, right? We were building Gauteng and we were bringing industry and everything into Gauteng, but we were not thinking very seriously about what do small towns, right? Inside of, what does, when we talk about local economic development, right? And we talk about that quite a lot, what does it look like in the context of these small towns where these young people are coming from and they're saying we moved to Gauteng from those places, right? And they are critical of that. They're saying, look, we recognize that but they also say, and interestingly, that some of these failures are failures of the ANC-led government, but we also have got a global context that we must factor in, right? And I find that argument particularly very interesting because it's also interesting because it also, beyond the fact that it's a correct argument, right? That says you can't speak about the macroeconomic decisions of the ANC-led government outside the context of the global balance of power. Right? You really can't. I think it would be a very dishonest conversation to have if you want to speak about the decisions that have been made outside the context of the very many complexities of both local and global contexts, right? And this is not to say that the ANC-led government has not had opportunities in which it could assert itself and make decisions that might not have been, that would have undermined, right, or challenged the global dominant the global dominant construct. But to say also that we must not speak or treat the ANC-led government or the government of any other country really as if the decisions, and particularly of developing countries, right, of colonial countries, as if they exist in isolation to everything else, because they don't, right? And because any argument that seeks to do that is dishonest, right? And that and perhaps Kwesi as well, right, to speak to that also in the context of the institutional weaknesses of the African continent, right? The many failures of the African continent, right, that have made it very difficult for any country to individually assert itself on its own. And I'll give an example, for example, of Zimbabwe, right? Now, Zimbabwe takes a very radical, the government of Zimbabwe takes a very radical and very progressive decision to expropriate land. Very progressive. No, you quote me. Very progressive decision to expropriate land. We can have whole debates about modalities and all of that, right? But there's a principle here about the expropriation of land from a settler minority to the hands of indigenous people who have been violently and systematically dispossessed over many, many years and all of that. The government of Zimbabwe takes that decision. And look, I'm not romanticizing this because I think that we're not going to get into that, but there are also very many layers because the government of Zimbabwe is not innocent. It's also problematic and all of that. And I talk about part of that. There's a section of that in the book that talks about that. But the government of Zimbabwe takes that decision, right? And what happens after that? It's sanctioned. Sanctions come left, right, and center. It's sanctioned by everybody. Everybody sanctions Zimbabwe. It's isolated. It's a country that was once referred to as the bread basket of Africa is literally reduced to a country of nothingness, to a country where almost half the population is in the diaspora, trying to make a living, a country of poverty, and really a country that was brought to its knees. Not a single country in Africa, not even South Africa. Of course, we did the best we could under the circumstances, which was we introduced the ZEP, right? The exemption permit and all of that when Zimbabweans were, fleeing from the violence, which was also a result of some of these structural issues I'm talking about. They were able to come to South Africa and so on. But because Zimbabwe took that decision and it did not have support, there were no instruments in place to support Zimbabwe when it took that. On the African continent, forget about elsewhere in the world. On the African continent, it did not have support. There was no South Africa doing the same. There was no Namibia or Cote d'Ivoire or Mali or any other country doing the same, and therefore being able to provide the necessary solidarity, practical solidarity that Zimbabwe would have needed. What did that end up happening? Zimbabwe ended up being isolated, and it paid a heavy price, a very heavy price, that it continues to pay to this day for that decision that it has made, right? And so when I say, Kwesi, that when we speak about these things, we must also understand that some of the decisions that we have had countries being forced to take, right, be it in South Africa, be it in Zimbabwe and elsewhere, have happened in the context where the support was non-existent, right? And the non-existence of that support has shaped the many decisions that were then taken, right? When, for example, because we don't have that practical solidarity that I'm speaking about, we don't have an active, strong institutions at work, right? When a country is in need, an African country is in need of resources, is in need of assistance, it must then be subjected to borrowing money, right? And to have all kinds of structural demands being made from it, right? And in the absence of having anywhere else to go, it is then compelled to take those decisions and to agree to things that any not rational thinking, but any person would not take. But the conditions do not allow for anything different. And I think we don't talk about that a lot when we talk about the conditions or the situation in which a lot of African countries have had to find themselves in. A lot of developing countries as well, so-called post-colonial societies, a lot of decisions that they've had to take that have happened in the absence of alternatives, and particularly in the absence of unity within the blocks in which they're located before we talk about unity anywhere else in the world. And that is why I think it is so important when we articulate the struggle of South Africa, the struggle of black people in South Africa, like I was saying earlier on, to identify and to recognize that this is not about, we are not talking about this in isolation in some corner of the world, Kokoning in Africa. If we don't link up our struggles to a bigger global struggle, we are going to find ourselves in a situation where our governments are brought to their knees, our countries are brought to their knees because of that lack of that, practical solidarity, but that lack of that oneness that would have been able to really anchor for example, the decision that was taken by the Zimbabwean government, or to anchor our decision to sustain our RDP project, to sustain those decisions, right? When the whipping is coming from everywhere and there's no alternative, there's no institutions and instruments in place to lend themselves to that support, it does create problems, because it's so easy to then say, oh, but you know, the government, this government of Namibia or the government of Zambia, they took this decision, they borrowed that money and so on, right? Where were the instruments on the African Union, in the African Union region, as it were, to enable them to have alternatives that do not allow them to take the decisions that they would have taken? And I think it coming back to then the issue about criticism of the ANC, I think in part there is that understanding. It's there, it might not be very advanced, but there is that understanding that says, but you know, there are decisions that had to be made in this country that might not be ideal, right? But that also there were conditions that were both local and global in their context that made this thing, not that there isn't any other alternative, but perhaps alternatives might have been very difficult and very costly. And in the absence of any support that would have been able there to mitigate against this, it would have, different decisions were made. But also, Kwezi, I think the other thing is that I think that the ANC, and this is the thing about these people who are saying to me, this is why we vote for the ANC. It's very important to recognize and to understand that people who support the ANC, and at least those that I spoke to in the writing of this book, are not blind to the failures of the ANC. And I must emphasize that because it's so important, right? Because it must dispel the notion that these are blind loyalists and they see nothing wrong with the ANC. In fact, I dare say, I don't know anyone who's more critical of the ANC than ANC members. I really don't. If you want to hear the worst criticism of the ANC, you're not going to hear it in opposition. If you think opposition criticizes the ANC, you are playing. You need to sit with members of the ANC, leaders of the ANC, some of them, right? Branch leaders, regional leaders, and so on, right? Who sit there. Nobody criticizes the ANC more than ANC members themselves. They do, right? But in that, and they will criticize that if it will even shock you, you end up utla ANC botlhoko. You are yourself. Right? And it will be a member of the ANC, a card-carrying member of the ANC who does campaigning and mobilizing for the ANC. You know, because of how harshly they criticize this organization, right? But in criticizing the organization, it does not negate that this organization that can be very problematic as well can also still be an important instrument in that with the right ingredients can still make a significant change in South Africa. That's what they're saying. That this ANC that is all of these things that we're criticizing can still, with the right ingredients, the right reorientation, in terms of thinking, in terms of this, and in terms of intellectual traditions emerging out of it, it can still be an organization, an instrument in the hands of the people that can still make a change, in part because of the issue from the last question, that this is an organization that has also been historically rooted in communities with the people. And so we can trust this vehicle. We can trust it, that so much good can come out of it, right? And it's not blind belief. We have got the evidence because we have seen an ANC that works. And we have seen an ANC, when it has been at its strongest, what it's got the capacity to do for South Africa, what it's got the capacity to do for the world. We've seen what an ANC government can do for the world. We just saw what the ANC government could do for the world in January, when the ANC-led government could stand in front of the world and say, we are going to call that country an apartheid state. And no matter what we're going to have to pay for that, we are going to do it because it is a just thing to do, because it is a right thing to do, because Israel is an apartheid state, because what is happening in Palestine is an injustice. That is the same ANC-led government that people look at and they say, but this government, you see what that instrument, if it goes into, if that instrument is still, becomes still the governing party, and it's thinking, it's right thinking, and it's doing things correctly, that is what that instrument can do. It is an instrument that can not only do all of these things for us, study grants and all of these things and all of that, it is also an instrument that can dare to stand up to all the powers of the world, in the West and elsewhere, and say, we alone, even if we stand alone, we are going to speak the truth, even if our voices shake, but we will stand on the side of Palestinian people, because it is a just thing to do, because it is a moral thing to do. That is the same organization. It is the same organization, you know? And I think because people identify with that. People identify with that to say, And that is the thing about human beings, right? And that is why we must do away with absolutism in our thinking, that we must allow room in which two things can be true at the same time. And those two things can be that the ANC as an organization has been problematic, but that the ANC as an organization has also fought very hard, important battles, important things that it has won, and shaped and changed society for the good and for the worse.
Applause, please. Those who are coming from the ANC, they call this session Mukhabulo session. So I think we've been fed. Just a disclaimer, I think it makes sense why Kaizer Chiefs would have branches. It's the biggest club in South Africa. But yeah, Sundowns, I'm not sure because they're only 57. So maybe it's one branch, yeah, Sundowns, I'm not sure. But I think important points have been raised here, especially the last one about, practical solidarity in the African continent. Because amongst others, questions have been raised, about African countries' willingness to come together, not only, in theory and in paper, but practically. When we look at the funding of the African Union, for example, and who built the headquarters of the African Union? It's not African countries, right? So these are some of the important questions that, we must have, not only in isolation, as you say. It's not only about black voters in South Africa. It's about, finding black people together in, the country of nations and finding solidarity in the struggle of black people. So I think that discussion was very important to frame, some of the Q&A that is going to follow here. I know that, a lot of people might be interested to engage you, but in the interest of time, I'm going to ask so that you can be brief. Allow both Malaika and Dr. Kwezi to engage you as much as they can. We are going to try to control Q&A. So it's going to be Ms. Oliphant, going to be 2, 3, just for the first round, and no one else. Okay, 4, Tabo, 5. Okay, let's take like that.
Can I make a proposition?
Yeah.
You know, Nane, one second. I regard myself as very clever. I don't want to lie to you. No, please listen to what I'm going to say. No, I don't want to lie to you. I regard myself as very clever. Very clever. I'm a very clever person. But I also, on the other hand, you see that nuance issue. On the other hand, I also know that I've got limitations, right? And so what I would want us to do, I don't want a Q&A per se.
Okay.
Because when you do Q&A, I already see you. You want to ask me questions because you think I've got all the answers. No, don't ask me. I don't have all the answers. Because I can already see even people who are doing physics. I saw the hand. I saw Prof there also raising a hand. He's going to ask me very difficult questions of epistemology. It's not just me alone here. The point that I'm trying to make is that I don't want this idea of a Q&A where the idea of answers are centralized between Malaika and Kwezi. So what we must do, let's have a conversation. So if somebody raises something and Noneba there feels like she's got a submission, she can respond to that. Noneba must take that thing. If a question is raised here and Leseho or Ole or Valentine feel like they can have an input there, please let's do that.
Okay.
I'm a geographer. Don't ask me many questions.
Okay, so we're having a discussion here. So I'm going to then try to take, okay, the mics will rotate. We're going to start with Ms. Lumka.
Just an ask. If you need to ask anything or say anything, please stand up so that the camera can pick you up, okay? Please. Yeah, please. So you'll need to stand up.
I do not have a question per se. I maybe it's a discussion that we must all have as we are having this conversation. And thank you for the documentation of the work that you have done, because I think the ANC is not doing justice to itself to document its work. It's not doing its justice to put out there in the language that people have to understand. And I speak as a communicator of government. We are at a stage now where we must talk about the successes of the ANC in the past 30 years. And it pains me to say that when you go and try to find the archives of the many things that the ANC has done, it's very hard to find them. It's either they are owned by other people and you have to pay for it in order for you to get that information. An example, I was looking for Mandela's particular speech about first thing that he did when he came out of jail was to release all children who were incarcerated. And I was looking in particular for that speech, and I couldn't find that speech. And I tried to go to the Mandela Foundation, and I couldn't find that speech. But I could Google and find, and because there were things that were being said in the department about what happened. Because I was trying to link what he said to what now is the Child Justice Act. So I think we need to have more of these conversations. We need to document the work even in universities and have these conversations, because there are opposite narratives that are happening around to what is happening now. And when Tintswalo came out, there was a lot of people who didn't want us to talk about our stories of Tintswalo. And when you tried, for one, I wrote one and I sent it out to the mainstream media. Not one took my story. And because I had other platforms to write, I was able to publish that story. So I'm really appealing that we need to try and talk and document and speak about the work that the ANC has done for us. When you talk about TEFSA, about NSFAS, I talk about TEFSA. When you talk about grade, I talk about standard. You know, when you talk about CPUT, I talk about Pentec. And I couldn't be here and speak this big English if it wasn't for the ANC. In my Tintswalo, I say, there was one chore at home that I really did not like. Ukhupha umchamo ekuseni wendlu yonke. Did you hear me? I still smell Ella baguette because it is the chore that I had as a girl at home. And my mother had a particular way of wanting us to clean that bucket. And it was the ANC then that today I decided that I needed to have 2 bathrooms at home so that not any of us can wait for another to be able to relieve themselves. So I'm appealing for documentation. And I also want to say, whoever is doing that TikTok campaign for the ANC, yes, man. Because sometimes I do have criticism of the ANC because I've got a child in aviation and it's very difficult to get there. And I remember the one time I was very angry coming from Lanseria Airport. And then I drove and I saw the big billboard of the ANC. Why was I clapping for that billboard in my car? I don't know. But I just want to say, let's please document this work because this work is very important. Not for just us, just for everybody to have it, because it's very difficult to find the stories of the ANC. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Yes, it's a story of Tintswalo. The subjects are under 35, right? From what I gathered, I want us to just converse a little, that we are still talking about SASCO fortress, you know. We stay in an informal settlement. The scholar transport is there. There's a grant, you know. These are still good things to have, but perhaps not the standard, right?
not hearing them saying, after graduation, I'm almost guaranteed a job, or I can start a business and it will thrive because of the environment. So I just want to ask, would you say that the book perhaps and the subject of 100 is a reflection of how Teen Swallows and under 35s are feeling to date? Particularly, it was almost obvious in our time that SASCO is going to win in universities. It's not as obvious anymore. Instead, it was a shock when they didn't win. But now it's almost like, oh, they didn't win, okay. So Teen Swallows are also having a voice in where they are at, where they are saying, we are not voting for this. So what can we talk about that?
Yeah.
Hi, just my appreciation to you, Malaika, and the moderator. My name is Noma Tamsanga. I'm just wondering, I mean, I'm very clear about the sort of erroneous assumption that, ANC voters are unthinking and irrational, but I'm just wondering if the theme of the lack of a viable alternative came up at all, that, they just have really no alternative except what is in front of them. I'm also curious about kind of when you were referring to, sort of this sort of idealistic view of the ANC, kind of in a way looking backwards at like the glory days. I'm also wondering whether the theme of it could get better, like things getting better is what's kind of motivating people because they are scared of the alternative or scared of sort of linking it to that expression that it's better the devil you know than the angel that you don't know. Did you get those themes coming through at all?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Thabo Shingange, the infamous Thabo. I think mine is more of a comment, and I think it builds on the lack of alternatives that were presented. But before that, perhaps maybe Malaika, let me start by I was about to say condemning. I think I'm in the rally here. Commending. Let me start by commending you first and foremost on the bravery of such a book launch. On the bravery of such a book launch. And I use the word bravery because it's almost become fashionable to criticize the ANC or to speak negative of the ANC. That is the dominant position. Until you are asked why we vote for the ANC and suddenly Malaika wa regile, because of the shock of when you inverse the question. So I really want to applaud you for that one, especially because I've been reading since you announced, online, in fact, from very interesting people from various organizations, high profiles, your EFFs, PASMAs, and so forth, and their inability to engage with this conversation honestly, but their ability to engage, to still recognize you as their force in that particular organization. I find it quite an interesting thing. But more than anything, I think it's important, the point, yes, Oranna. No, it's not about the bravery. No, there's no need to, no, actually, it's something that is wrong in this country, is that to promote the DA, the EFF is to bash the ANC. I don't need to mention them. There's that party, whichever it is. But for me, I want to touch on this thing of lack of alternatives. And, it's an interesting conversation because when you go around, now I work for government. So people think when we're campaigning it's because of what I'm American. No. It's because I'm not a politician. I'm not the principal. I'm the ordinary person on the ground, week in, week out, traveling different provinces, deep rural places. I thought I was poor to particular places in the country. And when you get to these particular places, you begin to see the work that the government is doing, that people just, I think started by saying, we are unable to narrate the work that the government is doing. The government is doing quite a lot. And it reminds me of a saying that, I think it's Malcolm X or whoever, of he who controls the media controls your mind. And it's a problem in South Africa, in a country that has lack of access to connectivity. So the sample base of online, the people who are engaging online, these narratives of the ANC is quite a tiny sample. compared to the bigger picture in the country. I'll make an example. I know I don't want to be long. I want to, to even highlight when I talk to people. Hey, for instance, I get shocked when they say the ANC is going to get 30%. Doesn't make sense in my head. Not because I'm an ANC member. Numerically, it doesn't make sense. And I don't even take it back. I said, don't speak from emotion. Let's speak from facts. Let's go to 2019, the last national election we had. In that election, the ANC had 10 point something million votes. I always make reference to 3 organizations. The ANC had 10 point something million votes, of which the membership base is, I think, less than 1 million, right? So you have 9 million plus excess people. You don't even know who they are. The DA, which is in fact the actual opposition party in this country, never mind those who are government in waiting, the actual opposition party is not even half of that number that the ANC received. I think it's, if I'm not mistaken, it was 2 point something or 3 point something million, followed by then the EFF, the third biggest party, on 1 point something million. So I then say, which is not even half of the official opposition. So when you say we don't have alternatives in the country, it's actually a reality. People will often tell you, and you maybe must ask the question, why we won't vote for DA, or why we won't vote for EFF, or why we won't vote. I think that conversation is important because of the reasons they'll give you, young people in this country. It's not just of why do we vote for the ANC. Maybe go and find out, why will I not vote for the DA? Why will I not vote for the EFF? Maybe a black party, let me not even use the DA. Why will I, Thabo, not vote for the EFF? Why did I, Thabo, not migrate with that migration that went to the EFF? I think we don't have those conversations enough. What informed me, after they tried to recruit, we were there, it was exciting, it was fashionable. Malema was our president in the youth league. He just got expelled from the ANC. Malema, EFF, mass exodus. It was fashionable. Why did we decide, quite to the contrary, I'm not going there. I think that conversation is actually lacking in this thing. So I just want to commend you for, opening up this thought-provoking. As you guys were speaking, I'm busy texting a colleague who's doing a PhD on youth, and I like how you guys, Kwesi, the both of you were having the conversation. I even said when Kwesi started questioning around the youth, looking at it as a homogenous entity, those conversations, I think we need to be having them quite more. So I think more than anything, I was just saying, this is not an ANC apologist book. I think it's an important book in this country in order to understand, I think in closing there's a line that says human beings are storytelling beings. We can only answer what are we to do if we can answer the prior question of what history and narrative do we find ourselves a part of. So up until we understand all of that, I think this conversation for me is what we need to be doing to get to the next level. With those few words, I want to commend you once again. Thank you very much.
Okay, Dumelang Malaika. I send you greetings from Professor Muhoze Chigore from University of California, Santa Barbara. Yeah. So I'm a professor of African history. I'm South African. I was born in Garankuwa. I was born in Istanbul, but I grew up in Garankuwa. I taught at VETS for 5 years, and I was using Malaika's book on Born Free. So if you go to VETS for 5 years, from 2018 to 2022, when I left for University of the Free State, because VETS doesn't want to promote us, you will find your book in all the June question paper, November question paper, because I don't know if they're clapping for me or they're clapping for her, but I think that's important. That's important that I wanted to bring your book into the classroom, because all my degrees from PA to master's, I never had someone like you who write, right? And my sister, you talked about the archives. I was in America for 60 days looking at the archives. I'm going to report that Ms. Baleka on the archives. There's so much on the archives on the liberation movements, not only the ANC, because I'm a historian, I cannot only talk about the ANC. I'm teaching South Africans. There's so much out there. I'm going to report to say this is what we have from University of California, Los Angeles, to University of West Indies in Jamaica. But to come to your book, Malaika, I thought it was very provocative to have a title like this, Why We Vote for the ANC. I'm not going to talk a lot because I want to read it and I want to review it, but it's going to be in my reading list for third year history next year. Because the challenge is we have been taught about other people who write, but those people don't look like us, okay? So I want my students, white, whatever, to see that they have their own people in South Africa who can write, you know? Thabo, you're saying why we criticize the ANC. We criticize the ANC because we expect so much from the ANC. I'm 56 years old, so I can talk about apartheid, growing up in Pretoria, going to the University of Botswana, going to University of Natal, Devon. I went in 89 when it was still a white university, right? My BA to my master's, I was never taught by an Indian or colored or black person. I was only taught by white people. They didn't even have PhDs, okay? I have a PhD from Howard University in Washington, D.C. But I'm just trying to say, as you are doing your PhD, we need to talk about the successes that our own people are having so that we are able to criticize the DA, you know? And we must also give credit where it's due. I respect Julius Malema for what he has done. He's the children of the ANC, right? We're all the children of the ANC. But what the DA has done with the flag, that is good because they're showing us that we cannot vote for them, okay? So it's a good job that they've done. I'm just gonna sit down. Actually, I'm gonna leave because I've been away for 60 days. I need to go home and cook so that they can see I'm back, okay? But thank you so much. Thank you so much for this book. It's very important what you have done. Thank you.
Sorry, before I give the lady a chance, I just wanted to say that, you know, we can talk the whole day, but we are going to cut this discussion in the next 10 minutes. In the next 10 minutes, so even when you speak, just let's try to, you know, keep it short because Malaika still has to do some acknowledgements. Dr. Kwesi still has to do his parting shots. So I'm going to just a few hands, short, straight to the point. I might not take all of you because I'm taking orders. So yeah, it's like a hierarchy. So yeah, I'm noting Mr. Makubela. You already noted. So it's going to be Mr. Makubela. Two. Huh? There. Okay, one. Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. Yeah. Okay. These are the last hands. But yeah. No. All of you. Yeah. So these will be the last hands. But it's going to be short, straight to the point, and thereafter we are going to allow Dr. Kwesi to do his parting shots. And thereafter, Malaika will do her conclusion and acknowledgements. So I'm going to ask Jorge for the mics. Can we take the mic, the one that you have? Can we take it that side? And I'm going to give you this one so that once we're done, we keep it this side. Yeah. So yeah, literally empathiaring again. Just brief, straight to the point.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, ma'am. So, I have a... Hey, so when I saw this... Oh, sorry. when I saw Malaika advertising this on her Facebook page, I was like, oh, my biggest influencer. Let me just go, 'cause let me just go because of I'm gonna be a first-time voter. Okay, my name is Andile and I'm a student at GJ. So I was like, I'm a first-time voter this year, and honestly speaking, there are a lot of voices. I don't know which party to vote for, but I'm like, I value Malaika's I value Malaka's opinions. So I came here and got your book, and I was browsing through, and I noticed that most of the students that you referenced here, they speak about the benefits from ANC, especially NSFIRS. Others speak about the grant. And like I said, there's a lot of voices in varsities that are busy coming in and out. And someone said, another party, they said that you should stop saying that you're gonna vote for ANC because they're giving you grants, and as first, it's not from them. So I wanted clarity on that because they're saying that that is state's money, meaning that if we vote for another party, we're gonna still get that. So now I came here to understand why my brother is so adamant about ANC, and where I am, it's like, no, ANC, you're gonna finish next year. You don't even have a job. You're not gonna work, all this and that. So I need clarity on that. Thank you.
Very honest question.
No, thanks very much. I think, well, we were expecting, so I attended, I think a month ago, I attended Mpho Dagada's book launch at Mall of Africa. And so I went there, of course, as an interested person, just to listen what this fellow is to say. And then I was listening, and then I realized after the book launch that actually I was sitting next to the person who wrote the book, and what he was saying, "Would you come back to South Africa?" It was quite a loaded question for a 10-year-old. But I believe outside even writing books, I think what government should do is to take South Africa outside South Africa, so that they experience Africa, they experience Europe, they experience North America, they experience South America, and they experience the world and come back and realize this is heaven with all its challenges. And I did not know how to package a response for my daughter. I did not know how to say to her, I came back home because there was a country to come back to. I left the US, I had a job at the university when I came back. But it's not like a South African thing. I'm saying there are people who are still, who I went to school with, who are still there, many of them from different parts of the world. They will not go back where they are coming from. But South Africans, I mean, we had a professor who said, I'm just left with 2 years, I'm going back home, and he's white. This is a beautiful country, but I find that the most ardent critics of this country that we've built are South Africans themselves. They hate it so much. South Africans hate this country so much. I was sent by the ANC as its spokesperson to Gareth Cliff, to the Gareth Cliff. No one in the ANC wanted to go. So they usually send me where they don't want to go. So I went there. This is like Friday last week. I went to the Gareth Cliff show. And he said that South Africans are running from their liberators. I said, where? A South African who is in Zimbabwe who is working as a plumber. There's no South African who is in Ghana cutting hair. There's no South African selling mirrors in Egypt. None. South Africans are remaining here with all the challenges that this country has. And I came here because it's an intellectual space, and I'm happy because the people who are here, I think this Awad Zuma, the worst mistake the ANC has ever done, called clever blacks, the most illiterate, the only illiterate president of the ANC that the ANC has ever had. Because we need to be able to analyze our country and be able to tell our own stories and tell it the South African way. I saw the guy, the Makosa, I forget his name, I was watching it, the Amakosa guy. Xhosas will, I get he put them on the map. Hey, Xhosas will finish you. Hey, yes, put them on the map. Yeah, yeah. So he opened a store in New York, right? He opened a store in New York, and for the first time, he gave a very honest interview, the same review that President Beggy did on the 30 years of our democracy. And he says there's nothing that compares to here. While he has a store there, but this is a very unique country. And I think we have to embrace it. I think more books must come out where we share our own experiences. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ntat. Okay, can you have that side? Yeah, I'm getting about that. Oh, okay, all right.
Hi. I'm a better writer than speaker, so I hope I can come across coherent. When my sister is like big follower of yours, and we talk about you a lot back when we lived together. And when my sister showed me the book that you came out with, like why we vote for the ANC, and the description, like what it's supposed to be about, I thought it would be more of a intra-conversation among young black people about why they vote for the ANC. But from what you said at the beginning of the session, you are speaking more of like you answering people outside these who view them from the outside, like white people who think young black people and black people in general are unthinking and uncritical and all that. I thought it would be more like talking among each other, and the reason I really hope it's a book like that is because I really like to hear from other young black people who live in similar situations that I've grown up in, why they think that South Africa ANC is the party to vote for into the future. Who come from places like where I come from, like in a small town in the Eastern Cape, where we only get water for like 4 hours a day, 2 hours in the morning and 2 hours in the afternoon, and it's been like that for almost 10 years now. And then last year, the government apparently gave the local government some money to fix some stuff there. And then the local government had decided that they're going to build some public toilets or something like that with the money. And the people were angry, like, what the hell are we going to do with public toilets when we don't even have water? Why don't, I think it was like 12 million, something like that. Why don't you take this 12 million and direct it towards fixing the water problem? Because the water problem was caused by the fact that there's only one dam in that area. And when they expanded the water pipelines, they never thought of more water sources to distribute to the larger area. So for me, I would like to hear from another young black person who comes from a similar background, like from a similar background, why they would continue to vote for the ANC when they see that the situation that they're living in is like that. Because for me, even situations like that come from the culture of the ANC that has caused stuff like load shedding. It's a lack of future planning and thinking that causes issues like that to occur. So for me, like, I can acknowledge very much so that the ANC has done great things for South Africa. I've never been in doubt about that. My parents come from very, very humble beginnings, and they've done great things for themselves that made me be in a better position at this point. And I'm not one of those people who think like Nelson Mandela was a sellout or anything like that, because I can acknowledge that Nelson Mandela did great things, and it's up to us as the future generations to do more than has been done at that point. But my question is, how is us staying with the ANC at this point gonna transfer us to doing better for the future, especially considering the way that they're acting at the moment? For example, I think I heard on the news that on the radio that ANC was found that NSFAS had like 800,000 ghost students. Like when stuff like that is so normal and something we expect. I was really shocked when I heard stuff like that, because we hear billions upon billions that are looted from the country by the ANC. So if we're thinking towards the future, how is us insisting on voting for ANC in this capacity going to help us going into the future? Thank you.
Hi. Is it working? Hi, my name is Olebogeng, and I actually had an opinion until Lisego started speaking, so I forgot what I wanted to say at first. When you say that the biggest critics of the ANC government is South Africans, we should be critics of the ANC government. We should never let the ANC sleep at night. At any given chance, we must just throw criticism at the ANC because it's the government of today. Now, this is what I wanted to say initially. So, I am not going to vote for the ANC. No. For many reasons. But it would be very interesting to know, because you did this work in Gauteng, it would be very interesting to know, because when I think about where I come from the Northwest, and when I look at the trajectory of how regressive that place has become. Now, I don't want to praise the Bophuthatswana government, because I think it was vile and unnecessary, but they did a lot of things. But when you look at where the Bophuthatswana government left government and where the Northwest is now, you would really, really wonder to yourself, why are the people in this province still voting for the ANC in their numbers? It would be very interesting to know, because the infrastructure in the Northwest is just, at the pits. And I come from a municipality called Madibeng. Now, if you know Setswana, Madibeng means a large body of water. Madibeng, Sidiba, Madiba. But we don't have water. Isn't that ironic? That you live in a municipality that's called Madibeng, but since 2010, in my village, we haven't had water. So when I think about the Northwest, and I mean, sometimes I work in the Eastern Cape, I always wonder, why do people here still vote for the ANC in their numbers? Is it because oppositions have got nothing to offer? Or maybe the ANC is embedded into their identity and they can't see themselves out of. So that's what I really want to know. Maybe you could do work there and see why is it happening. Thank you.
All right, thank you. I'm from a very famous township called Amanskral, just down the road. Yeah. So I have been a pastor for 10 years, and I'm still under 35. But there's something that you said about the ANC being embedded in the communities, which I think it's very important, especially for the survival of the ANC. The African National Congress in Amanskral, as we all know, Tshwane is under the DA, but in Amanskral there's not even one ward belonging to a different party. They are all ANC. Why? I go to a funeral, each and every funeral I go to, there is a space for a councillor, and the councillor is always there. Each and every community meeting I go to, there is a councillor. It is a culture of the people around there. They criticize the ANC, but they also depend on the ANC for leadership. That's the kind of leadership I'm talking about. I have a story that my uncle told me a long time ago, that they grew up in a place where nobody had a matric. So as time progresses, people started having a grade 12 matric. And there is a particular story that someone brought an old radio after they heard that a child in that community got a matric. They bring this old radio and they say, hey, we heard that your child is educated. Can they please fix this radio? And then they're like, no, but that's not what matric is all about. But that story stuck with me in order to understand the importance of education in any community. Each and every community has its challenges, and those challenges, people will look to the same people for the solutions. it doesn't matter where you are, it doesn't matter what you've studied. When the community wants a solution, they'll always go to the same people. So I like how you went to people who are not seen, who are not heard of, just to give a short story about the African National Congress. I'm from Hammanskraal, there's no water. Water is dirty. I have a little girl that I adopted. Every time we talk on the phone, because I live in Johannesburg, hey, when are you bringing the water? I have to organize some water to take it there. But when I explain to people the problems of water in Hammanskraal, that's when they will start to see that the problems of this country, they have so little to do with the ANC. And I'm not going to be afraid of saying this. They have so little to do with the ANC because we have a problem in this country, a problem of identity. You go to America, Americans says we are Americans, Even, there's nothing nice about that country. They kill each other. But when you speak of America, everybody stands up because there's a national identity where people are proud of where they come from. We will never build this country if we continue going different directions. I don't care whether you are ANC or EFF or whatever, but there must be a national identity. That is our responsibility everywhere. That is our responsibility, whether you're black or white, Zulu or Shangaan. There is a unity that we need to build as a people. Going back to the book, we need books like this. We also need books where people are going to call out the ANC for the problems they've caused in this country. We need books where people are going to be frank and talk about the problems they think they were caused by the ANC. Because that is what is going to build us as a people. That is what we will not be afraid of existing in this country. If we know that if something wrong happens, no one is afraid of saying, please stop that. Oh, ANC, please stop what you're doing. That is the national identity I'm talking about. Thank you.
Can I just borrow something very quickly? So when you just spoke now, right? And he raised the argument about how the problems of South Africa, I don't agree when he says they're not ANC problems, right? But I'll tell you, he said something very important, right? And this is one of the important things that we need to be doing, right? And it's what I'm hoping this book is going to start doing. It's for us to be able to recognize, right, that multiple things can be true at the same time. And I'll tell you specifically on the issue of Hammanskraal. So I did, you know I've got 3 master's degrees, right? You know. Wait. I have to say it. One of them, because I don't want to say my master's degree is on, I will say one of my master's degrees is on. One of my master's degrees is in water resource sciences, right? It was done with the Institute for Water Research at Rhodes University. And one of them, it's a master's of water resource science. It's an MSc in water resource science. And my case study was on Hammanskraal. The title of that research paper, the topic of that research, in fact, is analyzing the equity dimensions and governance drivers of water security challenges in Hammanskraal, city of Tshwane, South Africa, right? And that particular dissertation did a lot of work. We was in Hammanskraal, some friends in Hammanskraal, Boko Titi, and them were helping me. It was a very, very difficult study. In fact, so difficult because at the time I thought the data collection was done last year in May. Then that the cholera epicenter, Hammanskraal became an epicenter for that cholera outbreak that killed so many people, you remember. And water was part of, they've not yet given a conclusive thing, but it was the water. It's historically, it's been happening in Hammanskraal. Now you see, the water situation in Hammanskraal and in South Africa, as it were, is actually, there's a challenge of physical scarcity, right? Which is because of the geography of South Africa. We are a semi-arid environment. There's no water. Lack of water is a reality for most of the African continent, right? There's no water. It's a physical scarcity issue. But there are also governance drivers that inform that water scarcity, right? Issues about the failure, for example, of the city of Tshwane to deal with the issue of the Rooiwal water treatment works, the issue of failure of planning. Someone was talking about failures of planning and so on and so forth, right? That's one of the issues that was there. But there were many other issues. There were issues of equity dimensions that are involved in water, about the water policy of the country, as it were, right? The water policy of the country And we've had about 4 different water policies since 1948. And all of them have got the same similar logic, particularly as it relates to the economistic determinism that embeds those kinds of policies and so on. The fact that the water is inequitably distributed, right? That despite the fact that households are the ones that use most of the water in South Africa still gets used by farmers and all of that and so on. There are those issues that are there. And the point that I'm raising this about, and there's a whole dissertation, I'm not going to go into that, but the point I want to make, right, is that those two truths can exist at the same time. That South Africa is a water scarce country. That South Africa, like almost 75% of the world, does not have enough water as a physical scarcity issue. And at the same time, it can also be true, and it is in fact true, that part of the water challenges that we do have in South Africa are as the result of poor water governance in our country. And this is very important, and I'm raising this because I need you to understand what the crux of the arguments I'm raising with you is that multiple things about our country can be true at the same time. That the ANC can be an instrument of regression that has done things that are regressive, right? And at the same time, various other factors can inform why things are regressive. We can talk about how the ANC-led government has not made plans. So, I mean, if you go to Rooival, for example, it's not Rooival, yes, it's not Rooival, it's this one, Temba treatment works, right? If you go to Temba, the treatment plant, I was inside the wastewater treatment plant, you still find water infrastructure, a lot of it, that was built by the Bophuthatswana government, in fact, right? You still do find that. And there are those that then came during the administration of Sputa and so on and so forth. But you also, and the fact that you still have so much of the water infrastructure in South Africa, having been built so many years before in a different country, because South Africa 30 years ago was a different country. That water treatment was not meant to cater to the majority, right? It was meant for a few and so on and so forth. And the same issues you're raising about issues of load shedding, no, we can't blame the government and so on. Well, we can also, because there's also issues about governance of these things, about planning for these things, right? About thinking about these things, right? About an interdisciplinary thinking about some of these things and so on, right? But you can do that. You can and you should do that and say the ANC has failed on this and all of that. In so saying, do not negate historical and biological and many other issues that are factors that inform some of these things. They can all be true at the same time. The story does not have to be one narrative. It does not have to be one narrative. It really does not. And we need to move away from single stories. They are dangerous. Single stories are dangerous, and they are dangerous not because they are not true, but because they don't tell the entirety of the story. It's bits and pieces. If you say water governance, if you say there's no water in Hammanskraal, it's because of the ANC. Part of that is true. It's part of the story. But there is another part of the story that says, but there are all of these other things that we call physical scarcity because of water. There are all of these issues about separate development that happen in South Africa for centuries. As a result, even the integration of infrastructure is taking long on the grounds of ABCD and all of those things. Those things are possible. If you take nothing away from what we've just had today, if you take this book and you throw it in the dustbin, it is okay. If you take nothing because you think it does not matter, that is okay. But take out the only thing I ask you to take from this book about the ANC, about any other issue, about voting, but about water, about electricity, about this and that. The only thing that you must take out that really matters to me, that if you can get there, it's all I want for anybody who reads this book, is to understand the significance, the importance of nuance in the story that we tell. That there is no one story about the ANC, about South Africa, about ourselves. There's no one story. Some people who know me think I'm this aloof, arrogant, and it might be true. That might be a part of who I am. And if you ask my boyfriends, they won't tell you that. They will tell you a different story. If you ask my friends, it will be a different story and all of that. And all those stories, they can exist at the same time. There is room for all of them to exist at the same time. And the existence of one does not negate the other. The existence of an ANC that has done ABCD does not negate the history that we come from. does not negate the many other factors that may or may not have very little to do with the ANC. You don't have to take an absolutist position. You don't. In how you think about South Africa, in how you think about the ANC, the necessity of moving from absolutist politics cannot be overemphasized. We need to move away from the politics of absolutism. They don't serve our country. They don't allow us room to even think, and they don't allow us room to find common ground. Because the minute I posted a book cover and said, this is what I'm talking about, no, people who had not read the book, you have sold out, you sell out and all of that. People who do not know anything about the book. And do you see what that means when that happens? It means we can't even talk. We can't even talk because before I enter into the room and say, this is what I've brought to the table, you've already made a conclusion and made a decision about what I am going to say on the basis of a cover of a book. And this is just a miniature reflection of what happens when narratives are set and cut in stone, but when society does not allow room for multiple layers of truth and multiple stories to come out, and for them to be true, we need to be able to do this. Ole, who was talking about how she'll never vote for the ANC, is one of my closest friends, and I love her to bits, and she will never vote for the ANC. You'll never tell Ole to vote for the ANC. She will never do it, right? But I love that in that I will never vote for the ANC, there's also room to say, you know what? It is worthy, Malaika. She's the one who ran around looking for the venue for this. This person who will never vote for the ANC thought that it was important that this conversation must take place. This conversation about the ANC must take place because she thinks it has got value. And that's what I wish I can see in everyone, that you don't have to agree with an idea for you to be able to entertain it. You don't have to agree with the idea for you to be able to entertain it. And when you entertain idea, you don't have to take an absolutist position of either or. The truth is somewhere in that gray. It's not black, it's not white. Somewhere in that gray and in some other streaks of colors that come in is where the truth is located. Now, I am going to be the bully. That other side of me, that's also true. But it's not the whole truth because I'm also nice. We don't, at venues like this, we pay. Ne? With capitalism, you pay for everything. So we pay, and what it means when we pay is that we've got limitations in terms of time. We are limited in terms of time. We pay for a certain amount of hours that we can do a program. We also have to move because other people are also going to have the program. We must give workers time to be able to do their work. And we don't also want to place people in a position where they are also working late into the night and women having to go late at night when we have left. So I'm going to ask you, unfortunately, we are going to have to cut this, right? However, those of you who are going to be in Tshwane tomorrow, we are having a dialogue at the University of Pretoria. We are going to be having a dialogue at the University of Pretoria tomorrow. We're also going to be having more dialogues. I'm going to be updating on my Facebook about the many other dialogues that we're going to be having across the country, and when it's on radio or wherever the case may be in other different mediums, I will inform you, and the dialogue will continue because this is not enough time or enough space for us to be able to have such a full and heated and charged conversation, right? But the conversation must also get out of here. Because now, I spent a lot of time speaking to people who vote for the ANC and so on. I now want to go to EFF members and DA and talk about this book with them. I want us to move out of also talking to people who think the same way and all of that, right? And so we're going to be having a lot of these conversations all over the country until I'm to go back. I'm only living in June, but until I'm to go back, this conversation will be all over the place. So we're going to have to cut this for today to allow the Workers' More Freedom Park to do their work and to also allow for us to mingle as we get out, mingle as we leave, right? I'll sign books as well. I'm not going to sign books for people who are my personal friends and stuff that we meet elsewhere. Sonia, Pindi and stuff, I'm not signing those books. So books of people who probably are coming far and all of that, and we will not be able to see each other. Can you also give me that space? If you know we are going to see each other and we are, then let's do that. But if you know that, give other people a chance as well. And then we've been requested by the Freedom Park, where we are, to inform you that the 30th anniversary of the Madiba speech will be flighted tomorrow at 10 in the morning at the amphitheater, which is here in Freedom Park, right? And for RSVP, you must RSVP if you want to be to attend here at Magda. I don't know if I'm saying it right. It could be okay. I'm going to just spell it out because my pronunciation also is not. It's M-A-G. It's Magda. Okay, Magda. Magda magda@freedompark.co.za. magda@freedompark.co.za. In fact, it might also be helpful for you to sign, like to please sign there. There's Freedom Park has got a register there to please sign there, because they also tend to have a lot of events that they do over like throughout the year. Very important events that I think would be very interesting to some of you, but you can also get like think of access their newsletters and so on to see what other activities are being done here. This is a very important heritage site for us as a country. A lot of brilliant work is being done, and I was here last week, they were showing me a lot of other work that's coming, that's going to be done here. Really, really great work. I think if you are very deeply invested in the space of ideation, in the space of cultural preservation and so on, there's no better place than this. So please do sign that register outside so that they can be able to then communicate with you.
Okay, everyone, hello. The program is on Friday, on the 10th. It starts at 9 o'clock. But in the morning, around 6:30, there is ritual prayers at East Vivan. Yes.
Oh yes, there's a place for ritual prayers here, quite very interesting, and they normally happen very early in the morning. The ritual, as you imagine, Dimpep and everything, very profound. Very, very profound. So yeah, I want to thank all of you for being here. I understand the sacrifice that you had to make. I thank also those who are online, who stayed with us throughout this program. I want to thank as well Ospriti, who is, I don't see her, she's outside, so she's been coordinating this whole thing. They are, and all the workers from Freedom Park who have done nothing. We frustrated them. I frustrated them a lot, changing things and all of that. You know, our friend Hanyelo was supposed to be catering for us, but there are very important rules that were put in place that only one caterer can be used and so on. So we had to do back and forth. They had to make a lot of sacrifices for us. Just this morning, they had to organize a PA system because our PA system got, you know, held up somewhere and all of that. The workers of Freedom Park really, really did a lot of work to make sure that we've got a very successful program. I cannot thank them enough. I'm very thankful also to our camera guy, Rufus, who's also here. He's been all over the place. I'm thankful to our team that's doing the live streaming, and to everybody, to Vose, to Kwezi. You're going to be seeing Kwezi a lot because Kwezi is going to be with me, UP is going to be with me in a lot of other discussions and so on. And I'm also going to encourage you, Vose did read I'm going to put it on my Facebook as well, the profile of Kwezi, and then also some links to his work so that you can read his work and know what he's doing. And then when you want to have those conversations in your organizations, in your companies, you are able to then call him to come and lead those discussions, moderate those discussions, or just present on his work, because I think it's very important work. And yeah, I really cannot emphasize, and I thank my publisher as well, Tabiso, she's there at the back, who has had to work so hard, so hard, so hard. And by the way, she published all my books. So if you want a bestseller in the country, you know where to go. She is a brilliant publisher. She's absolutely a brilliant publisher. I cannot think of a more brilliant publisher. When I have a book idea, I don't even think about where do I publish it, because I know Tabiso is there. Very brilliant, 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 brilliant. The first black woman to actually own a publishing house in the country, a young black woman to own a publishing house. An absolutely, absolutely brilliant person. One of the State of the Nation addresses of President Ramaphosa actually acknowledged her for that. So I'm very, very grateful to that. I'm thankful to you, Ambassador Losi, for being here with us. I know how busy you were. I know that there was a program with the president. A number of people actually couldn't make it here because of that program. The fact that you are here with us is an indication of your commitment to this ideational space, but to also hearing the voices of young people. You've always been consistent in that. You've listened for many, many years. When we've come to you seeking guidance, seeking advice, you've always been here, and I can't thank you enough for that. And to all of you, thank you very much.
No, it's not.